saying, from this moment on, I'm just going to turn my laptop down. So if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. And as we go through, I will answer them. There is a little bit of a sound issue in this room. So if anyone in the room asks questions, the participants on Zoom may not be able to hear, but I will reiterate what the question was and what the answer is in the chat. So if that's cool with everybody, we're going to start. Again, if there's any issues, if you can't hear us or anything like that, just let us know in the chat. Good.
Okay, welcome everybody. So today we're going to be covering creating residential leases built for landlords. I got all my information from Chris Seepy. I've been learning under him for the past 8 years. And so we're going to cover the standard lease and some of the additional clauses. Okay, so next slide. So the Landlord and Tenant Board was created on January 31st, 2007.
It doesn't show up on my screen. It's just on that screen. Maybe. It's the other screen.
Okay, got it. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay, so it was created in January 2007, and it gives the landlords and the tenants responsibilities and outlines what their responsibilities are and the process for enforcing them. Okay. So on October 30th, 2018, a new standard lease was issued in Ontario. It is mandatory. For all residential leases, you have to use this now, but it doesn't cover a lot of stuff. And so landlords are allowed to add additional clauses. Now, Chris Seepy added 78 additional clauses. Not all of them are enforceable, right? But it doesn't hurt to try, right? So that's what we did. We put them in, or he put them in. It is proprietary information that I did hand off to you, and it can be purchased, and I will give you the information at the end of this presentation, and you can buy it from Chris Seepy. I told him that I would be doing that, and he's fine with that. I think last time I spoke with him, he was charging roughly around $25, well worth the investment. So now that before the standard lease was created, we couldn't enforce electronic communication with the tenant. We can now. So there is a tick on there. On the first page, both the landlord and tenant agree to receive notices and document by email. So we can do that now. So you can serve notices by email if you check yes on that box. I handed them all out. So okay, and then so that's good. And another really good thing is now we can enforce that the tenant have tenant insurance. Typically, if a tenant has car insurance and they add tenant insurance to that, it's like roughly $30 a month. It's very affordable. And tenants will say, well, I don't need content insurance, my stuff's not very valuable, but they do need tenant insurance, because if they cause a flood that causes damages to the unit below, they would be responsible. But the big thing is if for whatever reason the unit's not inhabitable, like a fire or a flood, the tenant insurance puts them up in a hotel. That is not the landlord's responsibility. A lot of people think it is, but it's not. Landlord does not have to put them up in a hotel. Their tenant insurance would do that. So very worth the $30. Oh, so we're going to talk about, so I'm assuming everybody's familiar with the residential, like the standard lease. Everybody has access to, it's very easy to obtain, and that's what you should be using. Now we added 78, Chris added 78 additional clauses. He thought of everything. It's unreal. So I'm going to go over them, but mainly the biggest one is the clause 39, the no smoking rules, and the clause 40, which is growing marijuana or hydroponic plants, because of the moisture issue and the smell that bothers like other tenants. So that's one that we definitely cover. Okay, so on page, okay, we're going to talk about interest in rent arrears. So that's just a pretty standard one. So if the tenant is,
On page 6.
sorry, on page 6 of 11, sorry about that. So it's clause number 7. So the landlord can charge a daily interest of the tenant arrears. I'm just going to kind of gloss over it. So if the tenant has rent arrears, the landlord can charge interest. It's just more or less, so that it entices the tenant to pay the rent on time. And then another one is the included amenities, number 8. And this specifically lays out, so remember, all this stuff is not in the Ontario standard lease, but these are the added clauses. So it shows on here, namely in clause number 8, that you can't have a washer or dryer in your unit. Sometimes tenants will bring one in. So he covers that. And then also a dishwasher. No, it's not permitted. Garbage compactor not permitted. Humidifier is not permitted. Dehumidifier is not included, but if the tenant has moisture issues, it's their responsibility, and I'll cover that later. Okay. And then this is a good one here. Prepaid rent deposit, top up, and interest paid. So this is a good reason to increase the rent every year. You have to give 90 days notice, and you have to do it in a written form. I forget what the form number is. I think it's an N1. And because the rent increases by maximum 2.5% every year, right? You up the rent, but you're not asking for a top up of the last month's rent. So every year you increase the rent, according to the allowable rent increase, and then you don't ask for a top up. That washes out the interest that last month's rent that you have kept. Then you don't have to pay that to the tenant. It's much easier for paperwork. I like easy paperwork. So I always make sure that I keep track of when the tenancy ends, like every year. And I always 90 days before that, give them the rent increase. And then that way I don't have to give them the interest.
So I have a question.
Mhm.
Just so that I understand as a tenant.
Yeah.
You mean to say that if my term is 5 years and I paid last month's rent as of the rent amount for the first year, and my landlord holds that for 5 years, owes me interest on it, but also increases the rent and doesn't get the increase, there's a clause in here that says we'll just call it even.
Yep.
No matter what the amounts were supposed to be and who would have come out on top, we're just going to call it even to make it simple.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a wash.
That makes sense.
And that is standard.
Okay.
But it's not the standard lease.
Oh.
So, and then next slide. So assignment to sublet. A lot of people don't know this, but if you're renting and you want to move, and your friend wants your apartment, you have to get the landlord's permission. The landlord is totally able to screen that tenant, do a credit check, go through all the same processes. That is their right. So you can't just sublet without asking and without getting their permission. Smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. Tenants, like my tenant, oh man, he's always unplugging the smoke detector because when he cooks, it goes off, right? So and you can't do that. That's why you want to do inspections, but quite often tenants, and sometimes if they're smoking in the unit, they'll unplug the smoke alarm, but that's really, really bad, and that could open the door to a whole host of problems. So you definitely want to put in here that you have to have, that it has to be in working order. And the tenant shall identify the landlord and hold the landlord harmless with any claims, damages, and all that sort of stuff. If the tenant has removed or disabled any detector and the tenant has not immediately reported it to the landlord. So it's just to protect yourself. Very important. Condensation control. I had a problem with a tenant just last winter. He was getting mold in his unit and he thought the landlord was responsible for it. So I went over there, I checked it out, I looked at all the mold issues and stuff, and I brought his lease with him and I showed him clause number 18, that it was his responsibility to manage the condensation. That if you're getting, because it's an older building and these older buildings, a lot of them don't have proper insulation. They're concrete and they just don't have the proper insulation. So in the basement units, mold is an issue. So it outlines in here what you need to do to control that. You've got cold air from the wind hitting the window, and you've got warm air in the apartment, and that produces condensation. It's the tenant's responsibility to routinely wipe off the condensation and keep it clean. When they're having a shower, during the shower in the winter even, or right after the shower, if there's not a fan, because a lot of these older buildings don't have fans, you have to open up the window to let the moisture out. Another problem is sometimes they'll air dry their clothes in the unit. Well, that causes moisture as well. So he covers all that stuff in there. It's really important because mold is bad, right? So I'm not going to go over, I should have mentioned earlier, I'm not going to go over every clause because there's just too many, but I'm just going to go over, highlight the really important ones. Clause number 24, joint and several tenancy. This is really important. So if you've got two tenants that come into the unit and they both sign the lease, they are both responsible for that lease. If one tenant moves out and asks, I want to be taken off the lease, they can't, because it's joint and several. They are responsible. So if they have a fight with their spouse and they move out, they are still responsible for half the rent. They're still on that lease. And so that's really important to cover yourself. Yeah, new lease. Their income. Yeah. Now, yeah. Then they have to move out. If you can enforce that. Right.
What would determine whether that would be enforceable or not?
It would go to the landlord tenant board. Not all the adjudicators are properly trained in the law.
I see.
And sometimes a lot of times they favor the tenant, right? But like I say, it's not all of these are enforceable, but it's just a really, really good way to cover yourself, right?
It's also good to explain your position from the beginning.
Yeah, to explain to them that if you guys are both on the lease, we're not going to just take you off the lease because you don't want to rent anymore. Most people don't think of these things. Right.
So just to clarify, and for the people online, if there's two people on a lease and one person wants to leave, the remaining person would have to go through the same process as if they were applying to rent again. And if they did not pass, I assume you would serve them a notice to tell them that they had to leave the premises.
Well, when the one tenant is moving out, he's got to serve a notice.
That's right. Yeah. Okay.
And so then that would be included with the other tenant as well.
Okay, so
it could
joint.
get messy. Yeah.
So the notice would be joint unless they tried to fight it out, and then you'd take it to the landlord tenant board. Yeah. Understood. Okay.
And the delays are unreal. Yes. Yeah. Based on your qualifying, like, can you qualify to cover the rent on your own? Because when they entered into the agreement, the landlord based the income on both people that are on the lease. And that's what they based their decision on.
So in the case of being served notice, a 60 days notice from, say it was a joint tenancy with two tenants, if you were served notice from the one tenant with their name on it, you would just respond by saying, this is a joint tenancy, therefore all or nothing. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So they would still be, if they move out, that's fine, but they're still responsible. Their name is still tied to the lease agreement.
They could move out, just not take themselves off the lease, everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Like they probably wouldn't even tell the landlord, to be honest. But if the one guy moved out and the other one can't afford it and then it's missing payments, and it just gives you a little bit of recourse. Pets, that's a big one. 50% of people in Ontario have pets. And a lot of times landlords are like, no pets, no pets, no pets. Right. But I mean, you gotta, like, I have a dog. I love dogs. And you know, like, so you got to kind of work with people. When I do tenant screening, I ask them what kind of pet they have. I don't ask them if they have a pet. I ask them what kind of pet they have. And, you know, so then I base my decision. You are legally allowed to turn a tenant down because they have a pet. Tenants don't think so, but yes, you are legally allowed to turn them down because they have a pet. Once they move in and they get a pet, there's nothing you can do unless the pet causes damage. Yeah, it's not enforceable. It's not. So that's why I want to know what kind of pet do you have? So if they have like a Rottweiler, I'm gonna turn down the application, but I won't tell them why. The only legal thing you are allowed to say to them is you did not meet the criteria. If they ask you to elaborate on that, you are not obligated to elaborate. What I do is I'll say, oh, I talked to my partner and we decided to decline your application. Like I pass it off to someone else or the landlord, because I manage 2 buildings in Oshawa, and I'll just say, sorry, the landlord wouldn't even tell me why. Sorry, I can't do anything about it. And typically I've never even talked to the landlord about this person. Right. So that's just kind of the way to deflect, because I don't want tenants to get angry, or you can't say you don't make enough money for the rent. If they give, I ask for last 3 months bank statements, and if they make $2,000 a month and the rent is $1,500, so I know they can't live off of $500 a month, but I don't say that because that's discrimination, and you could be sued by the Human Rights Code. You can't say because you don't work, because, you can't. That's why I'm turning you down. Or you have bad credit. You can't even tell people you have bad credit, and that's why we're turning you down. Best just to say, what I say is the landlord turned down your application and he wouldn't tell me why.
You're speaking from a property management standpoint?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then for my own property, I just say my partner. I don't have a partner. I talked to my dog. He said no. So, like, do whatever you want, because I mean, tenants are, I put an ad for a property that I have, a unit I have coming up for, I put it on the college website, and I got that's a lady that called me just now. I got a nasty email from a student, and swearing and cursing and threatening me because the rent was too high. And
Wow.
it wasn't high. So anyways,
With respect to the pets, I just wanted to add, because you had said this in your last education session, and I thought it was really interesting. So you can't technically tell a tenant after they've signed a lease and moved in that they have to get out because they have a pet, because that's not enforceable in terms of. So actually, in terms of the Residential Tenancies Act, I used to be a paralegal in a past life. You can not evict a tenant for having a pet. So in the lease, when it says no pets, it's not enforceable. The only way around that is what Joanne said, which is in the beginning process. You ask as though you're open to it, as though you can't turn someone down. What kind of pet do you have? I'm answering 2 questions at once. I'll tell the story after, but someone also said, what kind of pets do you allow? So the Residential Tenancies Act says you can't evict someone or turn someone down because of their pets unless the pet is inherently dangerous. So we're talking like
boa
tiger.
constrictors.
Yeah. Legal pets, even though if you're renting, like I can buy a house and there are pets that I can figure out ways to get, even though it seems like you can't have them. But when you're renting, if it's inherently dangerous or it causes, and this is completely up for debate in the landlord tenant board because it's very broad, but it causes undue disturbance or harm to other tenants. So like say it's a very, very dangerous animal. There has to be history of that, or it is one that is ruining the building for other people, stuff like that. But then that goes to the landlord tenant board. But what Joanne had said was she, in the beginning process, before it is in the gray area to turn someone down on their pets, have the conversation, say, what kind of pet do you have? I'm not against pets. Find out what they tell you, and then politely find a way to say, no matter whether you're turning them down or for what reason, would say, you just didn't meet the criteria. But then you had also said in your past education session that I thought was super smart and interesting as a landlord and property manager is after that conversation, you would investigate their social media. Because if they come back, because as a tenant, you can't turn me down if I'm already moved in and I have a pet. So I might be inclined to say, I don't have one. And then I move in with my 7 dogs. So Joanne, and I thought it was genius, said that she would go on Facebook or whatever and look them up. And if they're sitting there with their 7 dogs, it is perfect way to figure out the answer to that question and determine whether you're going to move forward with them or not.
Oh, yeah, because I actually had a guy, he looks like a great tenant, works from OPG. And so he was interested in one of my units in Lindsay. And I looked at his social media and there's a picture of him with his big dog sitting on his lap. So I'm like, oh, okay. But yeah, people on Facebook, people are always posting pictures of their pets. I know I do, right? So because we're proud of them, we love them, but yeah, just one other thing with Facebook too is you can go and look on Facebook and see what, check them out and that sort of thing. But you can never use that information ever. Like you couldn't bring it up in the landlord tenant board. Oh, I went on Facebook and here's a picture of them with their dog and they lied to me, whatever. You can't use that information against them. So it's just for you to look, right? Because of privacy. So pest control, that's a good one. I see it all the time. I'm on Facebook groups like landlord complaining about people and tenants complaining. And I hear it all. I see it all. It's a great education tool. There's solo, small landlord owners, whatever, solo on Facebook. And there's Ontario Landlord Watch. There's lots. So I get a lot of information and I promote the Durham Landlord Association on that, whatnot. But tenants seem to think that if they bring bed bugs in to the building, that the landlord has to solve the problem. So clause number 32, where a tenant or their guest brought allowed pets into the premises, the tenant shall be liable to pay for any of all treatments. So that's, again, we don't know if how that would hold up in the LTB, but it's definitely worth putting in there, right? So, sorry, no, that's it. You have to share. You're not share? Okay.
I can make a copy.
Oh, no, Nicole, give her. Yeah.
This is a lot of stuff, right? Like this is a lot of stuff. Do you find that first of all, when is this presented to, when you're an agent in property release per se, you're the listing.
Yeah.
When do you personally, make this document part of the conversation with the other agent?
With the other agent. So Fuji was asking that when we're going over this contract, when do I, as a listing agent, when do I introduce this to the other side?
Sure.
Yeah. Anytime actually. I would to be honest with you, I haven't done that yet. Right. I've only done it where, well, I did list one, I did rent one place, and then but the person came to me. I did it all throughout with like drawer and all the other things. But I send this document to the tenants and I give them time to review it. Yeah, you could definitely put it in the schedule.
I was wondering if you had done that and you had gotten any feedback from the other agents saying
This is too much.
it's too much, or what?
I have not had that. I've not come across that yet. So I did like I said, I found a place on Exeter Road and I put it on MLS, but I found the tenant came to me, right? He didn't have an agent representing him. But like I always, because of my past life, I was a property manager. And so I always give the tenants lots of time and I go over it with them and I make sure that they understand everything. And I know it's a lot. So clogged drains and toilets, clause number 33, the tenant is responsible for clogged drains and toilets and damages. So that's the first thing people say when they're a landlord. Oh, I don't want to get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning for a plugged toilet. Right. So I've never had that happen to me personally. I've got calls for floods. Visitors and guests. That's a good one too. So when you have a tenant, they can have whoever they want, You can't tell them you can't have a visitor or a guest. But he just put that in here, that you have to notify the landlord, but they really don't. If they're staying for more than 1 week. It's just, just to put it in there to cover yourself. Like I say, a lot of these are not enforceable, but I mean, I use them anyways, right? Parking. So this is a good one. The tenant can't have cars that aren't working, or work on their cars, or wash their cars in the parking lot. They can't plug in their car in the outlet. He had a building, he has a building on Westmount, and the person across the street would drive their scooter over and charge it on Chris's building.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it's crazy, but yeah, so, and then you have to have assigned spots and that sort of thing. Oh yeah, so 38 is the plugins and electrical cable extensions, that you can't use those. Now clause 39, I touched on that earlier. No smoking. So the standard lease puts in there that, that there are smoking rules, and then on clause 39, these are the rules. He elaborated on them. He even talked about a case study that where somebody lost because they said it was their right, because it was psychological to quit smoking. And so I think that's a really important one, is to have the smoking clause. It's not so much a thing now, but it used to be more. No growing marijuana, cannabis, or hydroponic plants. So again, I don't know how enforceable it is, but the hydroponic issue is going to cause moisture, and that's going to cause damage. Water beds. Who has a waterbed now anymore? But Chris thought of it. He also he had no fish aquariums. I can't remember, but I don't see that, but no pools. So quite often I'll see people, they'll be asking a question. My tenant wants to put in a pool. Yeah, oh, sorry, that's number 44. On page 9. Oh, maybe it changed. Maybe it was added. Yeah, maybe it was added. Sorry. Yeah, it's paid. So again, these are available for sale. Balconies. So that's another one. Balconies, you can't be hanging clothes all over the balcony, cooking, barbecuing, or using it as storage. Flower containers have to be hung on the inside. I mean, it's just really common sense. Carpeting is not permitted, and that's because it would cause damage. Entrances and hallways, this is a big one, and I don't know why this is not in the standard lease. But if you have a fire inspector going to one of your buildings and there's a bicycle in the hallway or a baby stroller, that's huge fire code. What's the word I'm looking for? Violation, yeah. So you can't, they have to be clear for emergency exit.
We have someone online asking, what about pools? There was a
Well-
question about the pools, so
Yeah, no, I don't allow pools because of insurance reasons and liability.
what about a plastic baby pool was the question?
Yeah, like those little ones, I don't think you could do much about that. But if you're gonna get one of those blow up ones, right? I mean, you don't want to have a pool in the backyard and the neighbor's kid comes in and drowns, right? So just to cover, it's really important for insurance.
Taken to landlords and tribunal over a kid's pool. And the ruling was that because it was less than 4 feet of water and the fence was 4 feet tall and had a lock-in latch, that the landlords could make me remove the pool, but I had to empty it.
Interesting.
Everything.
And did they? Uh-huh.
I made sure that there was no water left in, that a living fish could drown.
Yeah.
So, like, before I went to bed every night, I'm screaming it anyway, so they took me to the tribunal over the fact that my toddlers had a child.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's such a weird one.
So, sorry. What were the reasons they couldn't make you remove it other than the fact that it was less than 4 feet? Did you say something about a gate with a latch?
And it doesn't, it's not looked at by the city has an actual pool until it's a certain depth of water. And when you're holding water in your yard, the fence has to be at a certain height, and you have to have a locking mechanism. to
Oh,
prevent or other persons may not be able to swim from entering your yard. I live around the next, so we're like very big on kind of our fence and our gates, and the lock was always on and heavy. But when I was a tenant, I had a child's pool, it was 2 feet deep, it was a blow-up pool. And I just had to empty, we at least had fencing all the way around, it was metal chain link fencing. We had a gate, and the gate latch could be locked. So the landlords were not allowed to get rid of it, I just had to empty it.
Wow. Yeah, because I've seen pools, you know, like, you know, this high, no fence.
Wow.
Like, I mean, homeowners, tenants, everybody, we have to, you know, do, like you have, there's bylaws for that, for a reason, right? Household garbage and recycling. It just outlines the responsibilities. And, you know, again, I don't know why that's not, like, a lot of this stuff should be in the standard lease, in my opinion. But that's not. Just that they have to bring it to the curb and that they're responsible for it. Not the super. No hazardous substances, clause number 56. This is kind of common sense that, you know, you can't have hazardous materials in your unit. Right? So, toxic, dangerous, no businesses, number 62. So it is residential. So the tenant agrees that they or their guests shall not use the premises for the purpose of carrying on a business, profession, or trade, including but not limited to activities such as operation of babysitting, illegal operations like drug dealing, all that sort of thing, right? But another thing too, like actually Kristen covered this, but like a hair salon, if somebody wants to operate a hair salon in their apartment, right? Whether it's a legal basement apartment or in a building or whatever, and they're shampooing and coloring people's hair, and that's a lot of nasty stuff going down the pipes, and that could cause damage.
Same with animal rescue.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that's pretty much, let me see. Yep, that's pretty much, you know, the highlights of the extra clauses. And we did that. So this lease is proprietary. I bought it from Chris Seepy, well worth the investment. And that's his email address. And if anybody wants to reach out to him, I did tell him that I was doing this presentation and that people may be reaching out to him to purchase. So that is it. Any questions?
oh, you have this too.
Oh yes, buying and selling investment property. Sorry. So quite often, I don't know where to start on this one. So if you're buying and if you have a buyer, and Kristen just went through this, if you have a buyer and they want to buy a property that's vacant, you cannot promise it. Like you can't promise that, you know, because the tenants can dig in their heels and say that they're not moving. And then you have to serve them an N12 notice. Well, actually you have to have an offer. Like there's a whole, it's very complicated, but that's the thing is the only way, if you want to offer vacant possession, you can offer cash for keys. That's a popular method that people do. But typically, and the problem is that quite often when people are selling investment properties, the existing tenants are paying way below market rent, which has a huge effect on the equity in the building. So, you know, it's always best to sell vacant. It's worth more, but it's quite often not possible. I had a client, Joshua, and I showed him several properties that were tenanted well below market rent. And, you know, I told him you can't afford to buy these properties because if you go in and you want to move in and you serve an N12, the tenant can dig their heels in and say, so here you are, you bought a house, you want to move in yourself, and a tenant's living there and you serve them an N12, then typically, like quite often, the tenant will get angry and they'll stop paying rent and they'll wait for the whole LTB, and that could take a year or more. I tried to evict a tenant for personal use in July, and I had a hearing March 8th, and I still don't have a judgment. She did move out, but like that's a huge risk. And then providing notices, you know, you have to provide proper notices when you want to you know, show the apartment to potential buyers and that sort of thing.
So we just bought a 2-unit,
Mhm.
yesterday. And the
Yeah.
one unit has a tenant and we like the tenants, the tenant, the other unit is vacant. So I had to come up with something to put in there, asking the seller, like getting the seller to commit that they will not put a tenant in there prior to closing day and enter into any lease. The concern is they'll put, you know, somebody in there with way less than we're at the number stuff.
Yes,
So
that was a great
I
thing
was
to
wondering
do.
if that is important.
Yeah,
Okay.
if it's in, I think so. If it's in the,
Yeah, you would be better plus.
in the,
So I've seen it before.
Yeah.
It's- I had a, actually, we went off tangent a little bit, I had a client call me a while ago,
yeah,
which was, he said, "Uy, I want to rent a unit. And what if I just charge a gross lease, right? I'll just charge whatever.
yeah,
Or I'll cover all utilities. And if the tenant doesn't pay utilities, I'll just stop paying the utilities too. Like if the tenant stops paying rent, I'll stop paying the utilities."
you can.
I would say you should probably speak to or 1% that right. But it was a
You can't withhold vital services. It would never fly. So like if tenant stops paying the water bill, it goes on your property tax. Yeah. No, it happens all the time where the tenant, Fuji was bringing up, like saying that if tenant stops paying rent, the landlord has to still keep paying the utilities because they're vital services. I know. It is a wild world.
We had a question here about what the cost to purchase the clauses is.
Last time I spoke with Chris, I think he mentioned $25, but you'd have to talk to him. All you have to do is send him an email. Yeah. But I think it's worth the investment. Mhm.
My only concern with it are the clauses that we talk about that are unenforceable.
Yeah.
I think that as agents, we do have to, if the clauses aren't unenforceable, we have to at least have our clients acknowledge it or mention it at some point to say, by the way, we are preparing this for you, document from whoever. There are certain clauses that are not enforceable, but we do include them. It's just to give you an edge, you just go down this route. And that should be explained and disclosed with client.
Okay.
So to clarify, if you're a landlord and you're acting as a landlord but not an agent, you can have the tenant sign this lease with these clauses, and that's great because you made it for yourself. But if you're acting as an agent and you see clauses like
Representing.
this and you're representing the tenant, you have an obligation. Our broker of record says you have an obligation to point out that the clauses or which clauses are not technically enforceable in the Residential Tenancies Act.
I would say that.
Okay.
It's not for the enforceability, but to set, these are my expectations. Yeah, I would sign off. But I think the difference here is the role of the agent and the role of the property manager. As an agent, I'm never gonna have what unless it's for leasing. Like the residential lease would be between the landlord and tenant, right? As an agent, you don't get involved in having tenants sign leases as a property manager you would. But
Yeah.
as a real estate agent, that's between
have
the
to
property manager or the agent, how they choose to run their building stuff, right?
When it comes to a smaller scale though, and they don't have professional property management, they are really truly like, Landlord, for example, would truly be relying on you to provide the advice, maybe not the agreements. Possibly the agreement, but also like they don't have a starting point, and you have to provide something. And I will give my clients like, hey, this is a thing that we do, it's the standard lease form, but let's go through. For the first, like when we do it the first time, okay, let's go through it, let's see what's relevant to you, we'll talk about what's enforceable, what's not. They make their own decisions as to what to give that.
Yeah,
But, you know, once they have it, they'll say, okay, great, this is the package, and when the tenant comes, I'll have the tenant sign, or tenant's agent sign the lease with that. But it is a thing that we do.
Well, there's a lot of gray areas in the landlord tenant board, like the RTA specifically, it's a lot of gray areas. So I don't know exactly which ones are enforceable. It depends on who you're talking to. It depends, like, you know, who you get on the phone that day. It honestly, it changes, like it's very confusing. It's very confusing. But I talked to Chris about that, and what he said is they have it and they signed it and they agreed to it. So. Yeah.
So if you're representing the that's presented to you,
Yeah.
some of these. Not what you're helping. This it could be overwhelming, and the ones I've seen are like they need to go page, right? It's just rules. But then with all of these, it's like now they have so much more that they're gonna be like on the hook for possibly, right? That maybe they're not really.
And I would, if we were representing like the landlord, I would say, you would take this and put only the relevant things into your version, this whole whatever listing, and then you just have that for that property for the future. For example, if you're doing a condo and it has no parking, this whole parking and storage and admin thing, we take it out. We take out certain items.
And that's up to the agent. to
And
do.
but you would set that up to make. Yeah, I think this is a lot, to touch on anything per se, but I think it's a good starting point. Take things that you need, put them into a relevant schedule, present to chat with the landlord about it first and say, great, this is your schedule that we'll work with from now on. It provides value, and it kind of lost the meaning of you because they're not along with the initial process.
Yeah, so any other questions?
It looks like. Somebody said, what clause would you insert in Schedule A of an offer to lease to cover what happens if the tenant does not move out? Understanding that vacant possession cannot be promised with any tenanted property.
Ooh, okay, what clause would you insert on an APS?
In Schedule A of an offer to lease, so ATL, same thing.
Well, I would say that you can't guarantee vacant possession.
So we do have a clause that we put in our Schedule A's, that is, as far as I'm concerned, pretty standard, that just says that everybody agrees that upon moving in, there's vacant possession, and therefore there's also a clause that says, you know, at the end of the term, it says a whole bunch of stuff, including you still have to give notice because it goes month to month after that, right? So you, when the term is ended, if nobody applies for any longer period of time, you have to give notice. And then you can add wording in there that says upon like agreement of the end date of the tenancy. This is not very legal, the terminology that I'm saying, but you could make it sound better, but upon ending or completion of the term of tenancy, the tenant promises vacant possession. But then at that point, like, again, you said, it cannot be promised. And so this is something that unfortunately, if they don't leave, you'd have to take them to the landlord tenant board.
Yeah.
I think in real estate, Joanne, thought we meant offer to lease or offer to purchase. Sounds like an offer to purchase question.
It says in the Schedule A of the offer to lease. Okay.
Oh, that's what I.
Because anything real estate, as a listing agent or even a buyer's agent, anything that's subject to the dependent third party, like, which is a tenant in this case, I would never guarantee, because you can't enforce that.
No, you
That
can't.
human who is not a party to this one. And I'm kind of, you know, I sold lots of tenant properties. And that is the one thing, and I think the compensation, I've had nasty tenants that they're being like very difficult. But as long as you don't promise, I can't promise anything on behalf of that tenant. So just being, I guess, clear on that in the language of the offer and just making it to the very best of your ability, even though it's the bane of your existence that is happening.
There are a couple other ways around it on the buyer's side or the listing agent side. You can put stuff like, you know, the buyer and seller into a 30-day extension or whatever. You can build in extensions into the APS to help alleviate that if you suspect that there might be issues, or even if you don't, it's all good. You can build in an extension in that process to give the party involved time to sort things out. I've also seen some APSs where there is a, you know, if the parties can't, if the buyer can't get vacant possession by 90 days after this set out completion, it's offer is really purchase sale is not going.
Mhm.
Which releases along the way. That is something that you can also get into real estate. That's what expectation of negotiations for.
Yeah,
The only thing I was proposed on the listing side is that the seller will take all reasonable measures. Or the paralegal serving the appropriate notice that it's all, you know, they're doing all that stuff.
since COVID, a lot has changed in the landlord tenant world. It's gotten volatile and tenants are pushing back big time. And they're digging in their heels and they're staying put for like, you know, a year. So the 90 days wouldn't cover it. It never used to be like this, but ever since COVID hit, what happened was, we all know prices of housing went up, so did the rents. It's correlated, right? Rents have gone down a little bit because the prices of houses have gone down. But like it's exactly, I've noticed that. And so tenants are really angry because when they get a notice that they have to move out, if they want to move, they're going to have to pay at least $500 a month more for the similar type of home. So they're digging in their heels and they're pushing back and they're angry. Like I've never saw that it like it never used to be like this, but COVID really changed a lot. And and then when Doug Ford said, oh, we'll put a moratorium on evictions, like that backed up the landlord tenant board. It's crazy. And they can't get enough people to manage the delays. So 90 days is, yeah. But another thing too, that you brought up, when you do enter into a tenancy with someone, like say you want to do a midterm tenancy, right, for 6 months. So you would think that you could, you know, do the lease agreement with them and then along with an N12 that they're going to move out at the end of 6.
And then it'll just go month to month. Would it?
Yeah, it would just go month to month and you'd have to go through the whole process. Month to month is like, they have security of tenure. You can't get rid of them just because you're selling the property. It's really, really difficult. It never used to be like this. Mhm.
I was speaking to the patient at our brokerage who is representing a person and her children who are relatively new to Canada. She's gainfully employed, very good employment, left going to school, she's got her credentials. Very good credit score. And everything kept going through. You know, application was great, kept moving to the next stage. And a few times it got to, well, we wanted to do a meeting between the landlords and the tenants. And in those meetings, when those people of not the ethnicity, the landlords were seeing the face of this woman, it was done from there.
Mm.
Presenting a tenant, or a landlord. You get sellers and buyers and, you know, the
Yeah.
potential need to flat or something solid this time.
So you're asking to get get a lease agreement. It's the landlord's choice. Like, I obviously don't agree with discrimination, right? And, but, like, if the landlord wants to meet the potential tenant for whatever reason, you can't say no to them.
Tenants just cheap. Because they wanted to meet people that lived upstairs. You know, because everybody's gonna be living together in the same house, right? And kind of know what you're getting into, right? So, and if the landlords wanted to meet that too, to just arrange this meet and greet, you're not gonna get a lot of information. But you get it, because you want them to have, you know, a nice time living together, moving ahead, right? So I don't think it's a bad idea, that would be key. You're right, there could be some discrimination.
I've never come across where landlord turns someone down because they're an ethnicity or whatever, like a discrimination or anything like that. I've never had it happen to me. And I probably wouldn't work for a landlord that wouldn't be like that, to be honest. That would be my best practice. Because I don't work, there's a lot of landlords I would not work for. What's that? Yeah,
Here.
that's, yeah, I just wouldn't.
It wasn't shocking to me, unfortunately, in here, but when everything is good to go and, you know, gold star approval every time. And it's in that first 5 seconds of the screen come on and you see the visceral response to the way somebody looks. I imagine it has to be hard as the agent representing that tenant to try to fix that with the tenant going forward.
Honestly, though, from my perspective, if you're representing the tenant, you want to put them in an environment where they're gonna feel.
Yeah.
welcome and accepted.
Mhm.
So my honest opinion is better we know than later on. And we want to subject them to that negative situation as well. For me, it would be a moving on.
Yeah, let's find another landlord. I've never had a landlord do that.
That's really unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's,
Thankfully, her tenant is found a place, so you just said that just something, but.
oh, good.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's about it.
So I'm just gonna say it out loud rather than typing all of that further for everyone online. If you read the chat, I've explained the first half of what just happened, and the end result was basically to allow the landlord and tenant to meet or anything like that. If anything discriminatory is going to come up, unless they say something litigious that you could take them to court over, that is discriminatory. If they're gonna turn them down over that, better to know before they move in than to find out after that they are that type of a landlord.
And my best practice would be that I wouldn't work for a landlord like that.
Yeah. Any further questions? Anyone online? So if you want to contact Joanne, here's her information. Sorry,
Yep.
just kidding. And then just for anyone, I'm just gonna give this a few minutes. So if you want to purchase the clauses or the lease, please feel free to email Chris CP, and this is his email. I'll type it too.
Pardon me? Oh, okay, so, we started running the Durham Landlord Association, out of this brokerage in March. So we meet the third Wednesday of every month, from 7 till 9 PM, and we have different guest speakers. The last one, I was the guest speaker and I talked about, tenant placement, and that was really well received. Our next meeting is September 20th. At 7 PM, so it's the third Wednesday in September, and Chris will be speaking, and he's going to be talking about Bill 23, New Homes Faster or whatever it is, and then he's also going to be talking about mayoral powers and how I forget how he said it, but the municipalities passed on the mayors that the mayors can make decisions as far as creating more housing. And some of the mayors are saying, no, we don't want to do that. We want to, let the council vote on it and stuff like that. So he's going to talk about that. It's kind of controversial what's going on, but, and then also in September, The Oshawa City Hall is going to be having another meeting about the licensing program. So currently there is a licensing program around the university because they had to do it. Because there was a lot of, stuff going on, people piling students in housing next to regular residential homes and stuff like that. There was a lot of complaints. So there was a residential licensing program. Only 50% of landlords applied. They were hoping to have it up to 60. I forget what I had. I spoke at the last one. And be another one is licensing in Oshawa because it does nothing for the tenants. The slumlords are not going to even comply anyways, and it's a waste of money. They want to hire new people to do this, and it's not going to help the landlords. And in the end, the extra cost will be passed on to the tenant. So it's not helping the tenants. So that's another thing.
Cost.
Oh, so the landlord association meeting is $20 a meeting via Zoom, or if we can get that right. Yeah, we're working on the Zoom, but $20 per in person or by Zoom, or $100 for the year. So, and we got some great speakers. I have an insurance, adjust like a claim, a risk management, insurance person coming. And I've asked the fire department. So we've got a good list of speakers that we're working on for next year.
And if you're interested in landlords or representing landlords, you follow your company with other residential homes, so it's a best practice. Master really well execute.
It's a great networking tool for
So
sure.
for you or any new clients, that's a real value. Yeah, because that was one of the best presentations that I've been to in my real estate career, like wealth and knowledge right there, and Joanne also well.
I talk to him like weekly.
Yeah.
He was actually talking about vacancy control, and he sees that coming back. Does anybody know what that means? Vacancy control, and what that will do to the value of investment properties is. So what it is that when a tenant moves out, you can't up the rent to market for the new tenant. So that's something that I've got my radar on, because that will affect. They did it in, I forget, I got it in my notes. I think it was like 1981 or 87 or something. They did it for 9 years, and it decimated the rental market. People got out of it by the droves. Pardon me? We don't know if it's coming, but Chris said there's a good chance. And it caught, like, you should see the article that he wrote. It's crazy.
No, it wouldn't.
No, it wouldn't, because people get out. 30% of condos are purchased by investors who rent it out to tenants.
Yeah, it wouldn't.
Well, they're not doing that anymore.
It would basically make it so that there's no. And because of that,
Yeah, it'll hurt the tenants.
No inventory, high demand.
Yeah, and Chris was saying that now you're gonna get the black market. People are just gonna,
Yeah.
It's like prohibition.
I have a quick question.
Mhm.
They have to pay extra. Did you not just give it to them?
Well, like, no, but if they want to use it, like, so I did pass out these things, but if you want to use it on the honor system, you have to buy it from Chris, because it's proprietary. It is not for me to give or sell. So it's like $25. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Joanne.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.